It all started on a quiet Tuesday morning, one of those perfectly ordinary days that somehow spirals into chaos faster than you can blink. I was sipping my coffee on the front porch when I noticed something strange. The HOA president, known in our neighborhood for her iron-fisted rules and love for confrontation, affectionately dubbed HOA Karen, was standing in front of my house, armed with a paintbrush. My first thought, maybe she was going to repaint the community mailbox. But as I squinted closer, my stomach dropped. She was staring directly at my house number. For years, I'd kept my house number perfectly visible and according to HOA guidelines. But apparently, Karen had decided that perfectly visible didn't meet her personal standards. Without a word, she began carefully painting over the numbers. Slowly, methodically, and with that smug expression that can only mean she thought she was delivering justice. I wanted to intervene, to explain that my numbers were already compliant. But before I could even step off the porch, she waved me off. "This is for the community's aesthetic," she said, all haughty and righteous. As she dipped her brush into the white paint, the neighbors began to peek from their windows. Phones came out. I swear, a small crowd had gathered before I even realized it. And then it happened. The first stroke of the brush missed entirely. It wasn't a small miss. It was a glaring, sloppy smear that dripped down the side of her perfectly manicured fingernails. My neighbors gasped. I almost laughed out loud. But I knew better than to give her the satisfaction. Karen, however, didn't notice the paint running down her own hand. She continued, blissfully confident, insisting that my numbers were not aligned with the community's vision. Meanwhile, I was frozen in disbelief. Who gets so invested in a house number that they climb onto someone else's property to paint over it? Apparently Karen does. By this point, a few brave neighbors had come outside, whispering among themselves, and someone discreetly captured the entire scene on video. My mind raced. This could be a viral moment or a legal nightmare. The turning point came when Karen finally stepped back to admire her work, and that's when I noticed something I couldn't unsee. She had accidentally painted her own front door numbers upside down. The irony was perfect, almost poetic. Suddenly the self-righteous aura dissolved, replaced by chaos, confusion, and a lot of frustrated huffing. Neighbors were pointing, some trying to stifle laughter, others pulling out their phones to record. Karen's face turned red as she realized she'd turned her own house into the punchline of her war on mine. It was a scene I knew I would never forget, and one that would only escalate in ways I hadn't yet imagined. After Karen realized her own door numbers were upside down, the neighborhood erupted into a mix of laughter, whispers, and shocked gasps. I stayed on my porch trying to process what had just happened. One moment she was this untouchable enforcer of HOA rules. The next she was a walking, paint-smeared cautionary tale. The irony was delicious, but I knew better than to celebrate too loudly. HOA battles have a way of lingering like a bad smell, and Karen wasn't known for letting things go. As I stepped inside to grab my phone, my neighbor across the street, Mrs. Patel, shuffled over, clutching her cup of tea. "Did you see that?" she whispered, wide-eyed. She painted her own door wrong." I nodded, barely able to keep a straight face. "Yeah," I replied, "and she was so proud of herself a minute ago." Mrs. Patel shook her head. "I think everyone saw it. This is going to be the talk of the cul-de-sac for weeks." Sure enough, by late afternoon, the video someone had taken had begun, circulating through our neighborhood group chat. Comments ranged from sympathetic, "I can't believe she did that," to hilarious, "Karen won." Common sense. Zero. Even some of her most loyal supporters seemed unable to defend her this time. The sheer absurdity of the situation was undeniable. A woman obsessed with enforcing rules on everyone else had managed to break the most basic rule of all, keeping her own house number correct. Meanwhile, Karen tried to regain control, marching up and down the street with a roll of paper towels and another can of paint. She barked instructions at her husband, who looked more mortified than anything else, and even tried to convince one of the neighbors to help her fix the mistake, but her efforts were in vain. The paint had dried in a crooked mess, and the humiliation was permanent. From my porch, I could see the slow realization settling on her face. This wasn't going to end quietly. By evening, the neighborhood's energy had shifted. People started stopping by, ostensibly to ask how I was doing, but really to witness Karen's latest blunder firsthand. One neighbor even jokingly suggested putting up a little sign next to her door. Officially upside down, I laughed, but also couldn't ignore a creeping sense of tension. Karen was a master of grudges, and now she had a reason to target me personally. The peaceful cul-de-sac I'd known for years suddenly felt like the stage for a reality show, one where HOA rules, egos, and paintbrushes collided in spectacular fashion. Little did I know the worst was yet to come. Karen wasn't going to let a simple mistake go unpunished. She had plans, and they involved my house. The very next morning, I woke up to the subtle but unmistakable sound of wheels crunching on gravel. Peering through the blinds, I saw Karen's minivan parked in front of my house. She wasn't alone. Her clipboard was in hand, and her expression was one part fury, one part obsessive determination. I knew immediately that the painting incident wasn't going to fade quietly into neighborhood lore. Karen had made it personal. I stepped outside cautiously, trying to appear calm, but every instinct screamed, "Run!" She waved, smiling in that infuriatingly self-righteous way, then launched into a lecture about community compliance, as if she had just discovered a global conspiracy. This time, it wasn't about crooked numbers on her door, it was about mine. Karen claimed in her most serious tone that my mailbox was slightly off-center and that my garden gnome placement violated the HOA guidelines. The absurdity of it made me want to laugh, but I bit my tongue, knowing that any reaction would only fuel her fire. Word of her early morning patrol spread quickly. By mid-morning, several neighbors had gathered near my yard, ostensibly to watch, but clearly thrilled by the unfolding drama. Phones were out again. Live streams were being planned. I realized that Karen's vendetta had inadvertently turned my house into the neighborhood's entertainment hub. And the best part? She didn't even know it. Karen, completely oblivious, started measuring my mailbox with a tape measure, muttering about millimeters and proper alignment. She moved to the gnome, scrutinizing it as if it were a crime scene. I watched, incredulous, as she created a list of violations longer than my grocery receipt. The neighbors couldn't hide their amusement. Mrs. Patel peeked over the fence and whispered, "I can't believe she's doing this." Again, my own laughter threatened to escape, but I held it in. One wrong move and Karen might try to force me into an actual HOA hearing. Then the moment of poetic justice arrived. As Karen leaned over to inspect the gnome more closely, she tripped on the edge of her own freshly painted walkway. There was a brief, almost cinematic pause as she flailed, paintbrush flying from her hand. She landed in a patch of wet paint, leaving a colorful smear on her pristine clothes, and unintentionally on the bottom of her car tire. The neighbors gasped, then burst into laughter. I couldn't help it. I laughed too, a long, relieved, triumphant laugh. Karen sat up, sputtering, surrounded by evidence of her own chaos. While I realized something, the higher she climbed in her quest to assert authority, the more spectacularly she fell. And I knew, with an uneasy mix of relief and dread, that the story was far from over. After Karen's spectacular tumble into her own paint disaster, the neighborhood buzzed with energy. People were whispering, laughing, and recording videos as if a live sitcom had taken over our quiet cul-de-sac. I stepped onto my porch, trying to act casual, but inside, I was buzzing with adrenaline. Karen, meanwhile, was flustered, paint smeared, and, most importantly, distracted. I realized this was my chance to reclaim some peace, and maybe even teach her a subtle lesson in humility. Over the next few days, things escalated in ways I hadn't anticipated. Karen, determined not to lose face, began issuing formal letters about supposed violations. The angle of my garden hose, the way my welcome mat lay, even the height of my potted plants. Each notice was delivered with pomp, as if she were handing me an Oscar for most non-compliant homeowner. The irony was thick. Here she was, still obsessing over rules, while her own door remained upside down, a permanent reminder of her earlier blunder. The neighborhood, however, had taken a side, mostly mine. People would come over under the guise of checking on me, but really, they were there to witness the saga and share a laugh. Even the HOA board, embarrassed by Karen's antics going viral in our community group chat, started quietly advising her to step back. Yet Karen, blind to the humor and consequences, pressed on. Every attempt to assert authority seemed only to amplify the chaos, turning her into a figure of legend in our small corner of the world. Then came the moment that would cement the story forever. A community meeting was scheduled, and Karen appeared, paint stains still visible on her clothes, clipboard in hand, ready to enforce every rule she could imagine. But as she tried to lecture the homeowners, something unexpected happened. One of her own mistakes. The upside-down numbers on her door was projected on the big screen behind her. Gasps, followed by laughter, rippled through the room. Karen froze, realizing she had become a living, breathing cautionary tale. She fumbled for words, but there were none strong enough to reclaim her dignity. By the end of the meeting, the HOA had officially ruled my house was fully compliant. Karen's numbers remained upside down, and the community had collectively learned a lesson in humility, irony, and patience. I returned home, looking at my house numbers gleaming in the afternoon sun, and couldn't help but smile. Karma, it seemed, had a paintbrush, and a sense of humor. In the end, it wasn't just about house numbers or HOA rules. It was about perspective. Sometimes the people who try the hardest to control everyone else are the ones who end up painted into a corner of their own making. And as for Karen, well, she now has a story that will live in neighborhood lore forever. If you enjoyed watching this HOA Karen disaster, make sure to smash that like button. Drop a comment down below telling me what you would have done in this situation. And don't forget to subscribe for more wild Karen fails and HOA stories. And hey, hit that bell so you never miss the next one.